My name is Zara Whitmore. I am 72 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow of 10 years. For most of my life, I poured myself into others, into my husband, into my son, and then into his family. When people describe women like me, they use words such as steady, dependable, invisible. We are the quiet foundations of families, the ones who carry burdens in silence. I thought my days of holding secrets and surviving storms had ended, but I was wrong. One late afternoon, I walked down the narrow street of our town to pick up my daughter-in-law's coat from the dry cleaner. It seemed like a simple errand. Melissa had pressed the claim ticket into my hand that morning, her voice soft but hurried. She said, "Mother, could you please pick it up for me? I have meetings all day." And I, as always, nodded without question. That is what mothers like me do. The shop had stood on the same corner for decades. The wooden sign above the door was cracked and faded. The bell above the frame chimed when I pushed it open. A thin cloud of steam carried the smell of bleach and pressed fabric into the air. Behind the counter was Arthur Nolan, the owner, an old acquaintance. I had known him for more than 30 years. He usually sent his young assistant to fetch the garments, but on that day he did not. He adjusted his glasses, took the ticket, and walked slowly into the back room. I remember thinking his steps looked heavy, as if he were buying time. My fingers traced the wicker handle of the basket I carried from the market. Tomatoes and bread rested inside. I was already planning supper for my grandchildren, Ella and Jacob. I did not know that the next few minutes would rearrange my world. When Arthur returned, he held the coat in its clear plastic sleeve, but he did not hand it over. Instead, he scanned the shop as if someone might be watching. Then his calloused hand gripped my wrist. His voice, low and cracked, shook me. "Zara," he whispered, "listen to me very carefully. Take your grandchildren and leave this town before dawn." I froze. My ears rang with the words, "Leave? Before dawn?" My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. "What are you talking about, Arthur?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He looked around once more, then pulled me through a faded curtain into the back room. The heat of the steam pressed against my face. Piles of clothes rose like walls. He bent down, opened a small drawer, and pulled out a plastic bag. He pushed it into my hands, and when I looked inside, I felt my blood turn to ice. The bag contained a bank transfer receipt stamped in red. The number was so large that I read it twice, then a third time, certain my eyes were failing. Alongside it was a photograph. My grandchildren, Ella with her wide eyes and Jacob with his toy car clutched in his hand. Both their faces had been circled in red ink, the lines angry and crooked. Arthur's voice trembled. "I found this in the pocket of your daughter-in-law's coat. I should have thrown it away, but when I saw those children's faces, I could not. Zara, get them out of here. Do not waste a second." My hands shook so badly the bag nearly slipped to the floor. My tongue felt thick in my mouth. I wanted to tell him it was impossible, that Melissa was careless, that perhaps there was some explanation. But deep inside, a voice colder than stone whispered, "What if it is true?" I left the shop with the coat draped over my arm, the bag hidden deep in my pocket. My steps faltered on the sidewalk, and a tomato rolled out of my basket. People passed me, carrying groceries, laughing, calling to one another. Life continued, but inside me, everything had stopped. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the bag before me. I did not cry. I did not shout. I only whispered to myself, "If I tell anyone, will they believe me? Or will they think I am an old woman losing her mind?" I pressed my palms against the table and felt the weight of my years. The faces of my grandchildren burned into my vision, ringed with red. The number on the bank slip glowed like a brand. In that silence, a line formed inside me, a line I could no longer cross. Do not stay silent when the truth knocks at your door. That was the moment I understood. The woman I had once trusted as a daughter may have been hiding a secret that could shatter us all. When I left Arthur's shop that evening, the weight in my pocket was heavier than anything I had ever carried. Yet what pressed even harder was not the bag itself, but the memories that rose like shadows. reminding me who I had been and who I had become. I was born in the early 50s, in a time when women were told their worth was measured by how well they served their families. I followed the rules without question. I married my husband Thomas when I was barely 20. He was strong, charming, and determined to build a life from nothing. I stood beside him through every rise and fall. I gave up my own small dreams of teaching literature so that he could chase his career, so that our son, Ben, could have every opportunity. For decades, I was the quiet figure in the background. At church picnics, people would greet Thomas first, then ask about Ben, and only after all that, they would nod at me as if I were part of the scenery. I was the woman who brought potato salad, who kept the linens clean, who kept the peace when tempers flared. People said I was steady, dependable, but what they meant was invisible. When Thomas died 10 years ago, I thought for a moment that perhaps I would finally live for myself. Yet grief has a way of binding you more tightly than duty ever could. My son was grown, married to Melissa, starting his own family. I told myself my role now was to help, to step in where needed, to hold the pieces together in silence. That was what I had always done. Melissa and I, on the surface, we had a polite relationship. She smiled when neighbors were near. She called me Mom at family dinners. But there was always a coolness beneath her warmth, like polished wood that hides a crack inside. She dressed well, spoke well, and carried herself with a confidence that I never learned to wear. I tried to believe she accepted me. Still, I always knew I was a guest in her house, never quite part of the picture. There were moments when her eyes lingered on me a second too long, as if she was calculating something. At times, she handed me errands with a smile that carried no gratitude. I reminded myself not to be petty. I told myself it was the way of modern women, busy and hurried. But deep inside, I often felt like I'd been placed on a shelf, a relic to be used when convenient, ignored otherwise. The only light that never dimmed for me was my grandchildren. Ella, at 7, with her long lashes and wide eyes, is curious about everything. She draws pictures of houses and suns with bold red roofs. She talks with a clarity that often startles me, as if wisdom skipped a generation and landed in her little soul. She likes to sit by my side, asking questions about when her father was a boy, about the books I used to read. Jacob, only 4, is a whirlwind of energy. He clutches his toy car everywhere he goes, as though that small piece of plastic is his anchor to the world. His laughter spills like water, filling the room with echoes of the past when my own Ben was small and full of life. He climbs into my lap and presses his face against my neck, and for those moments, I feel the warmth of purpose. I keep a chipped teacup near me whenever I sit in the quiet of my home. It is pale green, with a crack along one side, the glaze worn thin from decades of use. It belonged to my mother once, passed down when she left this earth. That cup has seen me through countless nights, holding tea that cooled while I nursed a sick child, tea that trembled in my hands after arguments, tea that warmed me when silence was the only companion left. Now, whenever fear rises, I hold that cup as if it could steady me. I press my palms around it, feeling the familiar ridge of the crack, and it reminds me that even broken things can hold warmth. It has become my anchor, the one object that carries the weight of my past, my endurance, my love. As I think back on my life, I realize I have always been a vessel, holding everything for others. When Thomas came home weary, I held his complaints without judgment. When Ben struggled in school, I held his tears until he could face the world again. When Melissa arrived in our lives, I held back my doubts, swallowing them so Ben could believe his marriage was blessed. But now, after Arthur's whisper, I began to wonder if my silence had been a mistake. Had I confused endurance with weakness? Had my constant nodding, my constant stepping aside, given Melissa the freedom to live a double life right under my nose? That evening, while Ella and Jacob built a tower of blocks on the rug, I brewed tea in my old cup. The steam curled upward, and I sat in the rocking chair, staring at them. Their laughter filled the room, innocent, unbroken. I wanted to believe that innocence was unshakable, that no shadow could touch them. but the photo burned in my pocket. Their faces, circled in red ink, were a mark I could not forget. Jacob toddled over to me, holding up his toy car. "Grandma, look," he said proudly, "it can fly." He tossed it into the air, and it landed in my lap, bumping against the teacup. I smiled, but my chest tightened. What if the world had already chosen to strip their childhood away? Ella approached quietly, her drawing clutched in her small hand. She had sketched our house, a crooked roof with a chimney and 3 figures beneath it. Her, Jacob, and me. There was no mother drawn beside them. I asked gently, "Why not draw your mom too?" She shrugged, her eyes wide but calm. "She's always busy," she said. Those words pierced deeper than any blade. I wanted to correct her, to defend Melissa, but my throat closed. Instead, I nodded and tucked the picture under my teacup, a fragile shield against the storm I felt gathering. I thought of Arthur's warning again, his trembling hands, his urgent whisper, "Take your grandchildren and leave before dawn." It repeated in my mind like a tolling bell. But what terrified me most was not the possibility of danger. It was the certainty that if I remained silent, I would lose them. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, I sat in the dim kitchen with the teacup before me. I whispered to myself words I had never dared speak aloud. "Zara, you are not invisible. You are not weak, and if it comes to it, you will carry them into the light with nothing but your 2 hands." The tea had gone cold, but I drank it anyway, because even though it was cold, it reminded me of endurance. Even cracked, the cup had not broken. Neither would I. That night, as the clock edged toward 8, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with Melissa's name. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up, already expecting some casual request, maybe about groceries or laundry. The message was short, almost careless. "Mom, I'll be home late tonight, an unexpected meeting. Please keep an eye on the kids." I stared at those words. To anyone else, they might have seemed ordinary, just another line in a busy schedule. But to me, each letter pressed against my chest like a weight. After Arthur's trembling whisper, after that bag with its damning contents, how could I read her note as harmless? For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. I told myself, "Zara, you are letting fear take the reins." Perhaps Arthur misread the situation. Perhaps the receipt and photo had some innocent explanation. Melissa was not perfect, but she was the mother of my grandchildren. Was I really ready to believe she could bring harm to them? Still, Arthur's voice echoed in my mind. "Take your grandchildren and leave before dawn." His eyes, hollow with fear, would not let me rest. I picked up my teacup, the green one with the worn crack, and wrapped my fingers tightly around it. The ceramic felt cold, as though even it knew the warmth had drained from the day. I lifted it to my lips, but the tea inside had long since cooled. The bitterness clung to my tongue. My heart told me one thing. I had no choice but to act. I walked into the living room where Ella and Jacob were sprawled on the rug. Ella was building a house of blocks, her small fingers fitting the pieces together with quiet determination. Jacob was curled on his side, rolling his toy car back and forth, his lips moving as he whispered some story to himself. Their innocence made the decision even harder. How could I uproot them, carry them into the unknown when they trusted me completely? Yet how could I not, knowing what I knew? I sat down on the rocking chair and tried to calm my breath. The shadows stretched long across the walls, flickering in the lamplight. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone again. There was only one person I could call. "Grace," I whispered when she answered. "It's me." Grace and I had known each other for decades. She had been a nurse, the kind of woman who could steady a room simply by walking into it. She had been there when Thomas was dying, sitting through the long nights when even the doctors gave up hope. If there was anyone in the world I could trust now, it was her. "Zara?" Her voice carried a softness, but beneath it was steel. "You sound shaken. What's wrong?" I swallowed hard. I could not tell her everything. Not yet. If I spoke of the photo, the receipt, the red circles, I feared my voice would break. "I need a ride tonight," I said instead, forcing calm. "Somewhere far. I need it quickly and without questions." There was silence on the line, then a sigh. Grace had always been intuitive. My brother drives at night. He doesn't ask questions. I'll call him. He'll come in 10 minutes. Are you safe? I looked toward the children. Ella glanced up from her blocks, her eyes wide and trusting. Jacob giggled softly as he crashed his toy car into a tower. Safe was no longer a word I could believe in. For now, I said. Then pack, Grace told me firmly. Take what matters. Leave the rest. I ended the call and sat very still. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, each second louder than the last. Then I rose and went to the children's room. The closet door creaked when I opened it. Inside hung tiny jackets, folded sweaters, shoes lined up in pairs. I reached for Ella's blue sweater, the one she loved because it had a small patch of stars embroidered across the chest. I took Jacob's red pajamas, worn thin from so many washings, the fabric soft as a whisper. My hands trembled as I placed them on the bed. Next, I reached for the toys, the yarn. Doll Ella clutched every night, her comfort against the dark, the small plastic car Jacob never let go of. As I held them, my breath caught in my throat. These were not just objects, they were extensions of the children themselves, pieces of their hearts I dared not leave behind. I opened a suitcase and began to pack. My fingers fumbled with the zippers, clumsy with fear. Each piece of clothing I added seemed to thud louder than the last, as though the house itself were aware of my plan. At one point, I paused, gripping the edge of the dresser to steady myself. My vision blurred. What am I doing? I asked the empty room. Am I tearing them away from their mother? Or am I saving them from her? The moral weight pressed so heavily I thought my knees might buckle. But then I saw the picture again in my mind. The red circles, drawn with cruel indifference around two innocent faces. I heard Arthur's whisper, "Do not waste a second." And I knew hesitation could destroy us. I returned to the kitchen to fetch food. I took bread, cheese, and a handful of cookies, the ones Ella always asked for after dinner. I filled 2 bottles of water. I placed everything into a small bag, quick but deliberate. When I came back, Ella was standing in the doorway, holding her drawing. Her voice was sleepy but curious. "Grandma, are we going somewhere?" I forced a smile, though my chest ached. "Yes, darling, a little trip. We'll go on an adventure tonight." Her eyes lit up. "Will Jacob come too?" "Of course," I said. I brushed her hair from her forehead, praying she could not feel the tremor in my hand. Jacob, rubbing his eyes, shuffled over with his car still in his grasp. "I'm sleepy, Grandma." I crouched down, pulling a candy from my pocket. "Here, sweetheart. Be brave for me tonight. You can sleep in the car." His face brightened as he unwrapped the sweet. For a brief second, I let myself breathe. The suitcase now lay by the door, half-zipped, bulging with the hurried choices of a desperate grandmother. I picked up my cracked green teacup from the counter and placed it carefully on top of the bag. It was the only piece of myself I could not leave behind. Broken, but enduring, like me. I checked my watch. The minutes crawled past. Every tick felt like a warning, every creak in the floorboards like a threat. My palms were damp, my breath shallow. Then, through the window, I saw headlights pull up slowly at the corner. A car, dark and plain, idling with quiet patience. Grace's promise was kept. I turned off the lights, gathered the children close, and whispered, "Time to go." The headlights waited at the corner, still and steady. I gathered the children close, my heart pounding as if it were trying to tear free from my chest. I whispered again, "Time to go," and bent down to zip the suitcase. The sound of the zipper in the quiet house felt louder than thunder. Ella clutched her yarn doll to her chest. Jacob dragged his car across the floor until I nudged him gently toward the door. Their small feet shuffled against the rug, the familiar noise suddenly strange and foreign in the silence of flight. We stepped outside into the night air. It was colder than I expected, sharp against my skin, as though the town itself was warning me that nothing would ever be the same again. I looked back once at the house, the windows dark, the curtains still. For years, I had believed those walls meant safety, a place where laughter and meals and prayers wove a life together. Now it stood like a hollow shell, concealing betrayal. The car idled with a low hum, its lights washing the street in pale beams. The driver stepped out. Grace's brother, Michael. His hair was peppered with gray, his face worn, but his eyes calm, steady. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked in a low voice. "Yes," I answered. "Thank you for coming." He opened the back door. I lifted Jacob first, his head heavy on my shoulder, then guided Ella inside. She hugged her doll, her wide eyes reflecting the glow of the dashboard. I slid in after them, pulling the suitcase onto my lap, my cracked green teacup nestled carefully inside. As the door closed, the car seemed to seal us away from the rest of the world. Michael glanced at me in the mirror. "Where to?" "The bus station," I whispered. "As quickly as you can." He nodded, no questions asked, just as Grace had promised. The car pulled away, its tires rolling over the pavement with quiet insistence. Ella leaned against me, whispering, "Grandma, where are we going? It's so late." I kissed the crown of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, the sweetness of childhood. "We're going on a little trip, my love. Think of it like a vacation. Tonight, we'll chase the stars, and tomorrow there will be ice cream and sunshine." Her lips curved in a faint smile. Jacob stirred and mumbled, "Ice cream?" before drifting back into sleep. As I wrapped my arms around them, something rose inside me. For decades, I'd been told my strength was small, that I was nothing more than support in the background. But now, holding those children, I realized the truth. I was not weak. I was not invisible. I was the last wall standing between them and the storm. I was the shield that would not break. The town blurred past the windows. Street lamps flickered overhead, throwing pale circles onto the pavement. Storefronts, shuttered tight, looked like blind eyes in the night. A bus hissed to a stop across the street, its brakes shrieking before it rumbled off into the distance. The world felt both deserted and alive, every shadow carrying possibility, every sound sharp and unforgiving. We passed the bakery where I once bought bread every Sunday. Its sign swung in the wind, squeaking softly. I remembered standing there years ago with Thomas, our hands warm against one another as we carried home fresh loaves. That life seemed so far, away, almost like it belonged to another woman. Michael drove steadily, saying little. The rhythm of the tires against the road was almost hypnotic, yet my senses remained sharp. Every corner we turned felt like a question. Were we being watched? Was Melissa somewhere behind, realizing we were gone? Was the net already tightening? I stared at the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to appear, bright and unrelenting, but the road behind us stayed empty. Only the sound of night accompanied us, dogs barking faintly in the distance, a train horn moaning from far away, the occasional rush of wind as we passed intersections. The car interior smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. Ella's small hand rested on my arm, grounding me in the present. She whispered, "Grandma, will we be back tomorrow?" I hesitated, then answered softly, "Not tomorrow, darling, but soon. We'll go somewhere safe for a little while." She was silent for a moment, then nodded, accepting my words with the simple faith only a child could hold. That trust pressed against me like a sacred weight. The noir of the night deepened as we approached the outskirts of town. The streetlights grew fewer, the shadows longer. Trees bent overhead like watchmen, their branches clawing at the sky. Every flicker of light against the windshield seemed like a signal. Every movement at the edges of the road a potential threat. Inside, I repeated to myself, steady and firm, "You are not an old woman too weak to fight. You are the wall. You are the one who stands." We passed a police cruiser parked at a dark intersection. My breath caught, but the officer inside barely glanced up. For a fleeting second, I thought of stopping, of telling him everything. But I remembered Arthur's trembling hands and the words he had said, "Do not waste a second." If I delayed, if I trusted the wrong person, the children might never be safe. So I stayed silent, pressing Ella and Jacob closer. The town center slipped away, replaced by stretches of dark road. My heart beat with each mile marker we passed. The suitcase dug into my legs, heavy not with fabric, but with the weight of escape. At last, the glowing signs of the bus station appeared in the distance, flickering green and red against the black sky. Michael pulled into the lot and stopped near the entrance. He turned to me, his voice low but firm. "You'll need to hurry. Buses don't wait." I reached into my pocket for the small envelope of cash I had prepared. "For the ride," I said, handing it to him. He shook his head. "Grace would never forgive me if I took it. Just keep those kids safe." Tears pricked my eyes, but I swallowed them back. I squeezed his hand once, firmly. "Thank you." He nodded, then looked at the children with something almost paternal in his gaze. "Good luck, Mrs. Whitmore." I gathered Ella and Jacob, slinging the suitcase over my arm. The teacup clinked faintly inside, its sound like a heartbeat. As we stepped out into the lot, the hum of the car faded behind us. The bus station buzzed with life despite the late hour. Neon lights blinked against cracked walls. Vendors called out, selling coffee and sandwiches. Suitcases rolled across the concrete, wheels clicking in rhythm. A bus engine roared, drowning out all other sound as passengers hurried to board. In the midst of that chaos, I felt a strange calm. The crowd would hide us. The noise would shield us. Here, among strangers, we might disappear long enough to survive. Ella clung to my coat. Jacob yawned, his toy car still gripped tightly in his hand. I led them toward the ticket counter, every step deliberate, my heart steady now. For the first time in years, I understood the shape of my own strength, not loud, not violent, not desperate, but firm, silent, unyielding. As I bought the tickets, I whispered to myself the truth I had finally accepted. I was no longer the woman in the shadows, ignored and forgotten. I was the last line of defense, the keeper of these children's future, and I would not fail them. By the time the bus rumbled into Charleston, dawn had already broken. Pale light spread across the rooftops, washing the city in a tired gray. My body ached from sitting all night, my arms heavy from cradling Jacob as he slept, but I forced myself to keep moving. Exhaustion was a luxury I could not afford. We stepped down onto the cracked pavement of the station, the air thick with the smell of diesel and old coffee. Ella rubbed her eyes, her yarn doll tucked beneath her chin, while Jacob stumbled beside me, clutching his toy car as if it were the only solid thing in his small world. I looked around the crowded terminal, scanning for danger even where there might have been none. Men in work clothes shuffled past, women with children hurried toward waiting buses, students clutched backpacks. To them, it was just another morning. To me, it was the fragile beginning of exile. I hailed a cab, my voice barely steady. The driver, a man with tired eyes, asked, "Where to, ma'am?" I hesitated, then said, "Somewhere inexpensive. A motel safe enough for a few nights." He nodded and drove us through streets I half remembered. Charleston had once been my home, decades ago, when Thomas and I were newly married and full of impossible hope. Now it was unfamiliar, its landmarks changed, its corners sharp with memory. The motel we found was wedged between a pawn shop and a diner. Its sign flickered weakly, some letters burned out so that it only read ML. The lobby smelled faintly of bleach and stale smoke. I paid in cash, avoiding the clerk's eyes, and led the children down a narrow hallway to a room at the end. The door creaked as it opened. Inside, the space was cramped, the walls painted a dull beige, the carpet thin and stained. A single bed sat beneath a buzzing ceiling fan, its sheets faded from too many washings. The air carried the faint scent of dampness as if the room itself had absorbed years of strangers' worries. Still, it was ours. For the first time since Arthur had pressed that bag into my hands, I felt a sliver of safety, fragile, temporary, but real enough to breathe again. Jacob crawled onto the bed immediately, rolling his car along the blanket. Ella walked slowly, turning her head to look at everything. The chipped dresser, the peeling curtains, the lamp with its crooked shade. Then she turned to me, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "Grandma," she asked, "when are we going home? When are we going back to Mommy?" The question cut straight through me. My throat tightened, and my hands trembled as I set the suitcase down. I wanted to give her an answer, any answer, but the truth was too heavy. too cruel. If I told her what I had seen, the red circles around her face and Jacob's, the terrible meaning behind them, I would shatter her childhood forever. So I did what I had learned to do across a lifetime of silence. I said nothing. I walked to the window and pulled back the thin curtain. Outside, cars rattled down the street. Neon signs blinked over the diner across the road, and a man swept the sidewalk with slow, tired strokes. Life moved forward, indifferent to my grief. Behind me, Ella waited. I felt her gaze press against my back, searching for comfort, for certainty. My silence was not avoidance. It was a shield. If words could wound, then silence could protect. After a long moment, she turned back to her doll, whispering softly to it as if the cloth figure could give her answers I could not. I placed my cracked green teacup, the one I had carried wrapped in clothes, on the windowsill. Its familiar curve, its thin crack, looked almost defiant in this unfamiliar room. Light caught its surface, and for a moment it seemed to glow. It was the last remnant of home, a reminder that even broken things could endure, could carry warmth into cold spaces. I sat in the stiff chair beside the window, my hands folded in my lap. The children's voices blended with the hum of traffic outside. Inside me, the war raged on, fear against love, doubt against resolve. I whispered inwardly, "You are not a frail old woman. You are the wall. You are the last defense." The children eventually quieted. Jacob drifted into a nap, sprawled across the bed, his car still clutched in his hand. Ella lay beside him, staring at the ceiling with her doll pressed against her cheek. I stayed by the window, watching the street, letting the stillness seep into me. Hours passed like that. The day grew louder outside. The diner filled with customers, delivery trucks came and went, footsteps echoed in the hall. But inside, we remained a small island of silence, wrapped in shadows and uncertainty. In that silence, I found strength. Words had always been used against me, to dismiss, to belittle, to explain away what I felt. But silence, chosen silence, became my weapon. I would not explain, I would not justify, I would not beg anyone to understand. My silence was my defiance. That night, when the children had eaten the bread and cheese I had packed, I brewed tea with water from the motel's tap. The taste was metallic, far from the comfort of home, but when I poured it into my green teacup, the ritual itself steadied me. I wrapped my hands around it, feeling the warmth spread into my palms, into my chest. I looked out at the neon lights across the street, the way they blinked as though sending coded messages into the dark. I imagined Melissa's face if she realized we were gone, imagined the questions she might ask, the lies she might tell. My silence would be my answer. She would not hear from me, not tonight, not ever again in the same way. Ella stirred in her sleep, murmuring, "Mommy," so faintly it almost broke me. I pressed the teacup harder into my palms. I would not cry, not now. Tears would not protect them. Only silence, only vigilance, only the wall I had become. The hours stretched, the motel room dim except for the yellow glow of the lamp. I sat there long into the night, watching, listening, holding the teacup like a talisman. Every car that passed outside made my heart clench, but I did not move. Every creak of the hallway tightened my breath, but I remained still. I was not running anymore. I was standing. Here in this cramped room with its damp air and faded sheets, I drew the line that no one would cross. My silence was not weakness, it was power, and as I watched the children sleep, their small faces softened in dreams, I knew that no matter what storms still lay ahead, I would not falter. I was their wall, I was their shelter, and I would hold until the end. The next morning, after a night of fractured sleep and too many restless thoughts, I rose before the children stirred. The motel room was heavy with the damp smell of old carpet and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I stood by the window, my green teacup still resting on the sill, the last trace of home that I had carried with me. Its crack caught the pale morning light, and I whispered to myself, "Today, I will not stand alone. When Ella's eyes fluttered open, she rubbed them with small fists and asked, "Grandma, where are we going today?" I smoothed her hair and forced a smile. "To a place of peace, a church I once knew." Jacob stirred, clutching his toy car even in sleep. I packed what little food remained, helped the children into their sweaters, and we stepped out into the brisk Charleston morning. The city was waking, traffic rolling, storefronts unlocking, pigeons scattering across sidewalks, yet within me, a resolve steadied. I was not simply wandering anymore. I was walking toward answers. St. Francis Church rose at the end of a cobblestone street. Its stone walls were weathered but dignified, its tall spire piercing the morning sky. The bells rang as we approached, each note heavy and solemn, echoing through the air like reminders of something eternal. Inside, the scent of incense and old wood wrapped around me like an embrace. Light streamed through stained glass windows, scattering colors across the worn pews. Ella slipped her hand into mine, whispering, "It's pretty here, Grandma." Jacob darted toward a side aisle, his car clattering against the stone, until I gently steered him back. At the altar stood Father Adrian. His white hair shone in the colored light, and his face, lined with years of compassion and burden, softened when he saw me. "Zara Whitmore," he said warmly, his voice echoing through the quiet nave. "It has been far too long." Hearing my name in that sanctuary nearly undid me. I felt tears sting but held them back. I led the children to a pew, letting them sit with coloring books I had packed, and then approached the priest. "I didn't know where else to go," I admitted, my voice trembling. "The children and we are not safe." His eyes sharpened, though his tone remained steady. "Come," he said, guiding me to a smaller room behind the altar. It was lined with books and lit by a single lamp, the kind of room meant for quiet confessions. Once the door closed, the weight inside me spilled out. I told him about Arthur at the dry cleaner, about the bag, the receipt stamped with impossible numbers, the photograph of Ella and Jacob circled in red. My words shook, but I forced them into the air, because silence could no longer hold them. When I finished, the room was still. Father Adrian folded his hands, his gaze deep and steady on me. Then he said words I had not expected. "Zara, do not mistake your fear for weakness. You are not frail. You are protecting your family. That is strength." I lowered my eyes, ashamed of how often I had thought of myself as small, invisible, but I feel so powerless. He shook his head. "Power does not always roar. Sometimes it is the choice to keep moving, even when no one else believes. You came here. You are standing. That is power." His words struck something within me. I pressed my hands together, whispering, "Then what should I do? I cannot fight this alone." "You shouldn't," he said, "and you won't. There is someone I trust, a parishioner here, a lawyer. She has dealt with matters darker than most imagine. If you give her what you have, she can help." I hesitated. After so much betrayal, trust felt like a fragile thing. But then I thought of the children in the pew, their laughter, their fragile dreams. I nodded. "Bring her." A few minutes later, the door opened. A young woman entered, her presence quiet but commanding. She wore a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back, her eyes sharp behind thin glasses. She carried no smile, only purpose. "Zara, this is Clara Evans," Father Adrian said. "She's one of the finest lawyers I know." Clara extended her hand. Her grip was firm, professional, but there was a warmth hidden beneath the steel. "Father Adrian has told me only that you're in trouble. Please, tell me everything." So once more I laid it all out, the dry cleaner, the photograph, the receipt, the warning. As I spoke, Clara took notes quickly, her expression unreadable. When I finally placed the bag on the table before her, she pulled on latex gloves and carefully unfolded its contents. The receipt, the photograph, the foreign bank envelope. She studied each piece like a surgeon handling fragile organs. Her pen scratched across the paper. Then she looked up at me, her voice low and precise. "This is not just a family matter, Mrs. Whitmore. What you have stumbled into is larger than one household. These documents, She tapped the receipt. Belonged to a network. Offshore accounts, ghost companies, and the signature, Julian Cortez. He is not unknown. He has been tied to organized criminal activity for years. The words struck me like cold water. I gripped the edge of the chair. And my grandchildren? Why, their photo. Clara's eyes softened just slightly, though her tone remained steady. The red circles. They are markers. In cases like these, children are often seen as leverage, as bargaining pieces. I am sorry. My breath caught. I pressed my hand to my chest, whispering a prayer I barely remembered. So it's true. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, My words faltered. Clara did not rush me. She simply said, "If she is connected to Cortez, then she is more than a negligent mother. She may be complicit. This is not only betrayal, it is conspiracy." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Father Adrian placed a hand on my shoulder, steady as stone. "Zara, you were right to come here. You are not alone." Clara leaned forward. "The most important thing now is to keep the children hidden and safe. I will reach out to contacts who can investigate discreetly. Do not speak to Melissa. Do not confront her. Every move must be careful." I nodded, though my heart screamed with questions. "But how long can I hide them? What if she finds us?" Clara's voice sharpened. "Then we will make sure she cannot touch them again. But for now, patience is our greatest weapon." Patience, silence. Two things I had known all my life, now transformed into shields. When I stepped back into the main church with Clara and Father Adrian, the children were still in the pew. Ella had drawn another picture, this time of the church itself, its tall spire reaching into the sky. She showed it to me proudly. "Grandma, it's a safe house," she said, without knowing the weight of her words. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yes, my love, safe." As we left the church, I carried the teacup in my bag, its familiar crack pressing against me. It was more than porcelain now, it was a vow, broken but unyielding. And so was I. Father Adrian arranged for a parish, volunteered to watch the children in the church playroom while I stepped outside with Clara. The courtyard was dappled with morning light. Wind moved through the live oaks, carrying the faint scent of salt from the harbor. Clara spoke softly but with precision. "If you return to the house, be careful. Photograph first. Handle as little as possible. Call me before you leave." She handed me a small pair of latex gloves and a new zip bag. "I know this is not easy, but what you find could decide everything." I nodded, feeling the weight of the green teacup pressing against the side of my bag. I had tucked it in as I always did, a small relic of steadiness. I traced the familiar crack with my thumb, then let the bag fall against my hip. "I will bring the truth back," I said. The words felt like a vow. Clara drove. The road back to my old street unfurled with a clarity that stung. The houses were the same, their porches trimmed with ferns, flags lifting in the breeze. Children's bikes leaned against fences. Sprinklers ticked across lawns. It could have been any morning in the life I used to call ordinary, but the air tasted metallic. The edges of the world seemed sharper now. We parked a block away. "I'll circle once," Clara said, scanning the street. "No obvious surveillance. Text me if anyone approaches." She put the car in gear. "Zara, you know where to look." I did. Years of chores had made me intimate with every creak and corner. I used the spare key hidden in the planter by the front step. The door opened with a gentle sigh, as if the house were relieved to see me. Inside, the smell of coffee lingered in the air, stale now. A mug stood abandoned on the kitchen counter, a faint ring staining the ceramic. I listened. Nothing moved. I kept my steps light. The living room held its usual compromises, framed photos arranged to tell a happy story, cushions fluffed to cover the dents. I did not linger. I moved down the hall toward the master bedroom, past the mirror where for years I had adjusted my hair and told myself to smile. My reflection now was a thin ghost. Behind it lived the woman I had become. The safe was under the closet floor, hidden by a rug that never lay quite flat. I knelt, eased the rug aside, and pried up the loose board. My fingers remembered the place where it caught. The metal box waited there, dull and patient. I held my breath and fixed the numbers in my mind. Melissa had said them at a party once, careless and laughing, a date she swore she would never forget. I had pretended not to notice, but I remembered. I slid on the gloves. The dial clicked softly as I turned it. The sound traveled up my arm like a tremor. When the tumblers aligned, the latch gave with a dry little sigh. I lifted the door. The metal was cold, and the smell rising out of the box was paper, old and binding. Money sat in neat bands, too neat for a family with ordinary bills. The stacks were thick, the edges crisp. My breath went shallow. I did not touch the bills. I photographed them where they lay, angling my phone to catch the serials and the bands. Beneath them rested 2 cell phones in slim boxes, unregistered, unopened. I lifted one corner of the cardboard with a gloved finger, then let it fall back. Passports came next, arranged in a manila folder. Some American, some foreign, each name a lie that might someday have become a person. Under the folder, I found an envelope of tickets. My fingers trembled as I drew them out. The paper rasped a small sound that seemed much too loud in the quiet room. 3 tickets glared up at me. Business class from Chicago to Madrid. The names were stark and unmistakable. Melissa Whitmore, Ella Whitmore, Jacob Whitmore. No mention of my son. The dates were close. The departure aligned with the frantic days we had just lived. I steadied my hands against the side of the safe. The room tilted for a second. I pressed my knees into the carpet and counted my breaths. In, hold, out. "You are the wall," I whispered. "Stand." I took photographs of the tickets, the seat numbers, and the booking code. Then I slid the envelope aside and found another tucked flat against the metal. It was heavier than paper alone. I pinched the corner and drew it out slowly, careful to keep the edges intact. Inside, wrapped in thin tissue, lay a photograph. The picture had been taken at some formal event. The background shimmered in gold. The lighting was low and expensive. Melissa stood in a black dress, elegant, her smile practiced and bright. Beside her was a man I recognized by reputation alone, Julian Cortez. His hand rested at her waist. His eyes met the camera with unearned confidence. On the back of the photo, in Melissa's handwriting, someone had written 2 words and a date. The ink cut me like wire. I felt heat rise to my face. My mouth tasted of metal. For a moment, I simply sat there, the photograph balanced in my hand, my vision narrowing to a pin. Anger swelled up, not wild but grief-fed, a deep old rage that comes when people treat love like a tool. I could not deny that she had chosen a path that led away from all of us, and I could not pretend it had been an accident. I placed the photo back into its tissue and slid it into the envelope. Then I returned to the passports. Beneath them were IDs with other names, images of Melissa adjusted to fit each lie. I photographed every page, each lamination, each stamp. The gloves squeaked quietly against plastic. The small sound felt obscene. In the bottom corner, I found another envelope, a foreign bank logo printed slick and blue. Inside was a summary statement, numbers that matched the transfer Arthur had shown me. Transactions moved through shell companies like water through a sieve. I did not need to understand every line to know what they meant. I took photographs until my hands steadied. The house was still. Sunlight slipped along the floorboards. Dust lifted and turned in small galaxies. I sat back on my heels and closed my eyes. A question rose so clearly, it was almost a voice. How will you tell Ben that the woman he loves plotted to hand his children over like bargaining pieces? My chest pulled tight. I pictured my son's face, the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after Little League, the man who had tried so hard to build a life on steadiness and work. How do you tell a man that the person he trusted had marked his children's names on tickets to another life where he did not exist? There is no gentle way to do it. There is only the truth. There is only the law. I returned the contents as I had found them. Bills aligned, phones nestled, tickets set flat. I closed the safe and spun the dial to scramble the code. Then I drew the rug back into place, smoothing it with careful strokes. My hands were still trembling, but my mind had gone oddly calm. A decision had opened inside me, a straight, narrow path. I rose, checked the hall, and walked back through the rooms that had once held our holidays and arguments, our baking and birthday candles. On the way to the kitchen, I paused by the trash can. An envelope corner showed above a wad of paper towels. The same foreign bank logo gleamed faintly. I slipped it into the zip bag, careful to touch only the edges. Then I took one last photograph of the abandoned mug, the faint coffee ring, the lipstick trace at the rim. Ordinary evidence of a life, extraordinary in context. Outside, the street went on pretending nothing had changed. A delivery truck rattled past. A dog barked. A neighbor's wind chime rang. I locked the door and tucked the key back into the planter. When I reached the corner, Clara pulled alongside and cracked the passenger window. "Well?" she asked, voice level. "Did you find the truth?" "Yes," I said, enough of it to hurt. I handed her the zip bag and my phone. Photos of everything, tickets, passports, the envelope, a photograph of her with him. Clara's mouth thinned. "You did well. Chain of custody will be delicate, but your photos with timestamps help. Your gloves help. I will move quickly." She searched my face. "How are you, Zara?" "I am standing," I said. I touched the side of my bag, feeling the faint curve of the teacup through the canvas, and I will keep standing until this is finished. We drove back to St. Francis in silence. The church rose like a harbor, steady against the sky. In the playroom, Ella was drawing the spire again. Jacob had fallen asleep beneath the window, his toy car cupped in his palm like a small promise. I stood in the doorway and let the sight of them anchor me. The room smelled of crayons and dust and safety. Clara's voice was low behind me. "Next, we keep them hidden. We build the case. We do this by the book." She paused. "And when it is time to speak to your son, we do it with support. We do it with care." I nodded, the words falling into me like stones, solid, immovable. There would be pain ahead. There would be nights of doubt and mornings of anger. But there would also be law and light and the steady endurance I had trained for my whole life. The truth had been found. I would not be silent now. When Clara spread the photographs across the long wooden table in her small office, the air seemed to thicken. The blinds were drawn, a single desk lamp pooling yellow light onto the evidence. Outside, Charleston bustled with late afternoon noise, but inside, time moved with a slow, heavy pulse. I slid the last envelope toward her. My gloves still clung damp to my palms, though I had taken them off minutes earlier. My hands would not stop trembling. "This was in the safe," I said quietly. "Money, passports, tickets, and this photo, Melissa with him." Clara's sharp eyes scanned each item. She touched nothing directly, only moved pieces with the end of her pen, cataloging them into piles. "This," she said finally, tapping the airline tickets, "is proof of intent, not just suspicion." The door opened. Two people entered, introduced with a formality that made the hair at my nape lift. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Special Agent Miller." He was broad-shouldered, his voice clipped, controlled. Beside him, a woman with steady eyes and a presence that radiated calm extended her hand. "Agent Hayes, we specialize in organized crime." I stood, unsure, then sat again. I never thought my family would need people like you," I whispered. Hayes's gaze softened. "Families don't ask for this. It comes to their door anyway." They studied the evidence as Clara explained. Offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified identities, Cortez's signature scrawled across documents like a stain. Miller leaned close to one photograph, his jaw tightening. "This matches the intel we've been tracking. We knew Cortez was building leverage. We didn't know he had a domestic connection." "And now you do," Clara said. Her tone was calm, but her hand gripped her pen too tightly. Hayes turned to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, the children, Ella and Jacob, where are they now?" "At St. Francis," I said. "Father Adrian is watching them until I return." Hayes nodded. Good. That's the right place. Safe. Miller opened one of the confiscated phones and connected it to a small device. Lines of code streamed across Clara's laptop screen. For minutes, only the hum of the lamp filled the room. Then, suddenly, Miller's voice sharpened. Here, a deleted thread. On the screen appeared a short message. My eyes caught on it before my mind understood. 2 targets selected. Ensure delivery. The words burned. My breath caught. I pressed my fist to my chest. Those words were not abstract. They had names. Ella. Jacob. Hayes glanced at me, her voice gentle but unflinching. This confirms what Arthur feared. They were marked. I bit down hard, swallowing the cry rising in my throat. If I gave in to tears, my hands would tremble, my voice would break, and these were the very hands that needed to hold steady. So instead, I whispered inwardly, "Do not cry. Hold the line. You are the wall." Miller highlighted the sender, Melissa's number, the receiver, a contact saved only as JC. His mouth hardened. Julian Cortez. Without question. Clara leaned back, her gaze turning toward me. Zara, this is no longer a private betrayal. This is a criminal conspiracy. The only way forward is through law. Her words pressed down like a final verdict. Part of me wanted to scream, to tear through the silence with anger, to demand how a woman who once sat at my table, who kissed her children's heads at night, could write such a message. But I said nothing. My silence was not weakness. It was armor. Hayes reached across, resting a steady hand near mine but not quite touching. You did the right thing. If you had dismissed Arthur's warning, if you had stayed, the outcome could have been unspeakable. I closed my eyes. Behind my lids, I saw Melissa's smile in photographs, the way she had once tucked Ella into bed, the time she laughed in the kitchen while frosting cakes. Then the image warped into the woman writing those words, circling faces in red ink as though they were merchandise. 2 targets. I opened my eyes and met Hayes's steady gaze. I want them safe, I said simply. That's all that matters, Miller nodded. We'll build the case piece by piece. But make no mistake. This is a dangerous network. They treat families as currency. You've given us a key. I felt the weight of my teacup in my bag again, steady and grounding. Its crack reminded me that broken things could still endure. Then take it, I said. Take every piece I have. Clara slid the photographs into folders, marking each with care. We'll prepare protective custody options for the children if necessary. But tonight, keep them close. Say nothing to Melissa. Let us move quietly. Quietly. That word had defined my whole life, and now it would define my resistance. When I left the office, the sun had already dipped, throwing the city into dusky gold. I walked slowly, every step deliberate. My chest ached, but I held my shoulders straight. In my mind, Melissa's message repeated like a drumbeat. 2 targets selected. And I repeated back. Not while I still breathe. That night I returned to the motel. Ella and Jacob were curled together on the bed, their small bodies warm, their breaths even. I sat in the chair by the window, poured tea into my cracked green cup, and held it until the porcelain warmed my palms. The city outside hummed, neon signs flickering, traffic rolling by. Inside I made a vow in silence. I will not cry tonight. Tears will only weaken the hands that must stay steady. And so I sat, with the cup against my palms and the children's breath in the air, holding the line until morning. The plan came together in a room that smelled of paper and resolve. Late the next afternoon, Clara gathered us at the small conference table. Agents Miller and Hayes sat across from me, their files spread like a map of dark roads. Through the glass door, I could see the hallway of her office. A receptionist answered phones with a calm that felt almost unreal. Inside the room, every breath seemed measured. "We will not file a false report," Clara said, looking from me to the agents. "We will not lie to law enforcement. What we will do is stop responding. We will let absences speak. We will leak nothing but silence. Melissa must feel the floor tilt beneath her. When she does, she will reach for the only hand she trusts. His." Hayes nodded. "We have an emergency warrant. A judge signed off based on imminent risk. We can monitor her calls and messages in real time. Do not contact her. Do not contact anyone who might pass word to her. Miller slid a small device across the table to me. This belongs to us. You do not need to do anything with it. Think of it as a window. We will do the listening. Your job is to keep the children safe. Stay where we can protect you. And breathe. Breathe. I had forgotten how. We moved the children to a secure room at St. Francis. A teacher from the parish guided them to a table covered in crayons and puzzles. I kissed Ella's temple. She smelled of soap and pencil shavings. Jacob pressed his car into my palm, then tucked it back into his own hand as if reminding both of us that some anchors cannot be shared. I told them I would be nearby, that we were safe, that we were building a secret fort only the brave could enter. It was not a lie. The truth simply wore gentler clothes. Back in the conference room, the waiting began. Time thinned. An hour stretched. A minute snapped. I held my green teacup with both hands, though it was empty. The weight of it steadied me. Miller monitored a screen that showed nothing but lines of numbers and a faint pulsing dot that, he said, indicated Melissa's phone. Hayes sat beside him, taking notes. Her pen moved like a metronome. At first, there was nothing. Then a single text pinged on the screen from Melissa to me. "Mom, where are you? Please call." Clara touched my sleeve. I did not move. The next message came faster. "Have you seen the kids? Answer me." Then a call flashed. My phone vibrated on the table. We let it ring. The sound cut through the room like a saw. It stopped, started again, stopped. "She will keep trying," Hayes said. "We wait." Minutes ticked. The light through the blinds shifted from gold to a flatter gray. I thought of all the times I had answered Melissa without delay, the errands I had run, the silent rescues only I would ever remember. My throat tightened, not with pity, but with grief for the pretenses that had held our family together. Those pretenses were gone. Only the less comfortable truths remained. The call changed direction. Melissa dialed a different number. Miller straightened. "This is it," he said. His voice stayed calm, but a line drew tight along his jaw. Sound filled the speaker. The connection had the faint, warped echo of distance. Melissa's voice came first. It was breathless, fast. "Where are you? I cannot reach her. The children are gone." A man's voice answered, dry, annoyed. "Calm down. I told you to manage your side. You do not understand. Without them, the deal falls." She swallowed. I could hear the tremor on the line. "You promised protection. You said this would be simple." My hands tightened around the cup so hard I thought it might crack further. Without them, the deal falls. Not a metaphor, not panic talking, not a misunderstanding. A condition, a term. In that instant, hate tempted me. Not the loud kind that burns through rooms, the slow kind that freezes what is human. I breathed. I did not let it bloom. The man answered with a hiss of impatience. "Nothing is simple. Do not repeat those words on the phone. Meet me tonight, same place as last time. Bring what you have. We will salvage this." Melissa whispered. The line dipped. "He will kill me if I fail." Hayes raised a hand, eyes on the waveform that pulsed with each sound. There. Force. A lever. Not only greed. Clara leaned close so only I could hear. "You see, weakness can turn cruel when it walks the wrong road." I wished I did not understand. I did. I knew something about the ways people trade pieces of themselves for love, for approval, for a promise that a brighter life is only one brave betrayal away. That knowledge did not absolve Melissa. It explained nothing. It only sharpened the blade of what came next. Miller scribbled the time. Location metadata scrolled across the screen. "We have enough for surveillance, not enough yet for a full arrest. We need an exchange, a meeting that ties them in real time." He glanced up at me, not unkind, just clear. "Our work is to build a case that holds. Your work is to keep holding. This is where many families falter because shock needs movement. Do not move." I nodded. I would not move. Melissa called me again. The speaker lit with her name. My phone buzzed like a trapped bee. I let it ring. She texted Ben, the same panic, then more calls to unknown numbers. Some went unanswered. One responded with a single line that read, "Stop using this channel." It felt like watching a net pull tight around a creature that had always believed itself free. The second call to the man was shorter. "Tonight 8, the lot behind the golden palmetto," he said. "If you fail again, you will pay." "Do not threaten me," she snapped back, a shard of pride glinting through fear. "I brought cash. I brought documents. I can bring more." "Bring the right thing," he said, and hung up. Silence held for a long beat. No one in the room spoke. My heart thudded slow, heavy. I placed the teacup on the table. My hands had begun to ache from holding it so tight. Hayes broke the stillness. "We will take it from here. We will stage the lot, teams on both exits. No sirens, no lights until we have what we need. You and the children do not go anywhere near that place." "Do not worry," I said. "I am done walking into rooms without exits." Clara pressed a packet toward me. "A safe address. If anyone appears at the motel, go straight there. Call no one. Wait for my signal. I will send a parish volunteer to sit outside your door tonight. You will not know she is there. That is the point." She held my gaze. "Zara, you have been brave in 1,000 quiet ways. This is one more." Her words settled in me like a steady hand. The bravery of women like me does not make headlines. It makes breakfasts, wakes in the night, holds, waits, does not crumble when the room begins to spin. I took the packet and rose. Evening came dressed in the blue of cautious hope. Back at the motel, I kept the lights low, the blinds drawn. Ella colored at the small desk, a bright sun over a square house, a chimney that puffed in tidy curls. Jacob drove his car along the edge of the bed, wheels clicking against the fake wood trim. I sat by the window with the teacup, this time hot water poured over a tea bag, steam lifting, scent settling my breath. At 7:30, Clara texted, "We are in position." 10 minutes later, the device on our table hissed to life, a direct feed from the surveillance van. A soundboard caught voices and footsteps. A door, the sigh of a parking lot. Hayes's whisper came through, measured, close to my ear. Targets approaching. Female, mid-30s, alone, no children present. I closed my eyes. Gratitude, sorrow, both at once. For a second, pity rose like a tide, that she was still a girl in the worst part of herself, that she had traded the best parts to impress a man who did not know how to keep anything. Then came the steel. She had written a sentence on a screen that cut my family open. There are some roads one cannot walk back from without facing law. A car door slammed, men's shoes on concrete, a low male voice. "You made a mess." "Where are they?" she demanded, panic back in her throat. "Without them, the deal falls." "Then it falls," the man said, colder now, "unless you have them by midnight." Hayes's whisper sharpened. "Mark that. Admission of leverage. Timeline. Threat." Miller's voice farther away. "Hold, hold." A radio click, then the command that closed the circle. "Now." The feed is filled with movement, not shouting, not spectacle, the kind of efficiency that belongs to people who have practiced saving strangers. The male voice rose in fury. Metal scraped. A second voice yelled, then a clean order. "Hands where we can see them. Do not move." Another beat. Cuffs. That flat, final sound. I set the teacup down and let down set. My hands rest open on my knees. No triumph moved through me. Only relief so deep it felt like a tide turning. Ella glanced over. She smiled, not knowing what the night had been, only sensing that the air had changed. Jacob leaned against my leg, the car tucked against my calf. Hayes came back on the line. "We have them secured. All units safe. No injuries. We will process. We will contact you in the morning. Rest if you can." Rest. I folded my hands, whispered a thank you into the quiet room. Then I said the only prayer I still remembered by heart. Not for vengeance, not for victory, for steadiness. Clara texted one more line. "You held, Zara. We will carry the rest tonight. I turned off the lamp. The room went soft. The city whispered beyond the blinds. My chest loosened. The ache did not vanish. It simply became bearable. I lifted the teacup one last time and felt the crack under my thumb. Familiar, faithful, broken. Yes, but still holding warmth. I did not cry. I swallowed the tears because tears would only shake the hands that must stay steady. I sat in the dark and breathed and kept watch over the small sleeping bodies on the bed, the wall, the last defense, until the hint of dawn touched the edge of the curtain. The car was parked 2 blocks away from the lot. Inside, the air was tight with anticipation. It smelled of old upholstery and the faint bitterness of burnt coffee someone had spilled earlier. I sat in the back seat between Clara and Hayes, the cracked green teacup cupped in my palms. I had insisted on bringing it, even though it seemed absurd in the presence of radios, guns, and tactical gear. For me, it was not absurd at all. It was the only piece of home I could still carry. Miller's voice crackled through the radio. "Alpha team in position. Northeast corner secure." Another reply, sharp and quiet. "Bravo team, rear exit covered. No movement yet." The radio chatter rolled over me like a tide. I didn't understand the codes, but I understood the weight in their voices. This was the kind of night when one wrong step could unravel everything. Hayes leaned slightly toward me, her voice gentle, though her posture was all steel. "Zara, you don't need to say anything, just breathe. Your job is to bear witness, nothing more." Bear witness. I nodded, though my throat was tight. I stared out the windshield at the sliver of the motel parking lot visible beyond the warehouse. A pale arc light shone down, turning the pavement into a stage. I thought of Melissa stepping into that light, not as the daughter-in-law who once kissed flour off her fingers in my kitchen, but as a woman who had chosen lies as currency. The radio flared again. "Target vehicle approaching. Repeat, target vehicle approaching from the south entrance." Clara's hand brushed against mine. She didn't try to take the teacup away, only steadied it with her touch. My heart pounded, each beat a hammer against the cage of my ribs. Through the narrow gap in the window, I saw headlights swing wide, then cut as a dark sedan rolled into the lot. The car's door opened. I glimpsed Melissa's silhouette, thin and hurried as she stepped out. Her heels clicked against the asphalt, a sound sharp enough to pierce the night. "Target confirmed," Miller said in my ear. "Stand by." Melissa moved toward the shadowed corner where another car waited. She raised her phone, her head jerking left and right. I could not hear her voice directly, but the listening device carried every word. "Where are they? I can't find them. Without them, the deal falls apart." The words, already familiar, cut me anew. She said them with desperation, as if bargaining for air. My teacup rattled against its saucer. I pressed it tighter to my chest. From the other car, a man stepped out. Julian Cortez. Even from a distance, his posture was unmistakable, the casual arrogance of someone who believed himself untouchable. His voice carried through the device. "You're sloppy. Do not speak of them here. Finish your part, or we're both finished." Melissa's voice cracked. I was promised protection. "You swore this would end differently. If I fail, you know what he'll do to me." Her tone startled me. I had expected defiance, greed, cruelty. What I heard was fear twisted into complicity. For one flicker, my heart lurched. She was not only betrayed, but betrayed, caught in a cage she had chosen to enter. Clara whispered beside me, a line that struck like scripture. "You see, Zara, weakness can rot into cruelty when it follows the wrong hand." I closed my eyes. The moral conflict sliced me open. Could I pity her, even now? Could I forgive the trembling voice of a woman who had once asked me for my pot roast recipe while planning to erase us from her life? The radio hissed. "All teams hold. Repeat. Hold." Melissa's words tumbled faster. "They're gone. She took them from me. Without the kids, I have nothing to trade. He'll kill me, Julian. Do you hear me? He'll kill me." Julian's answer was cold as stone. "Then you'd better find them. Midnight is your last chance." The command snapped across the radio. "Alpha team, move in. Bravo team, secure the rear. Execute. What happened next unfolded in fragments, not through my eyes but through the radio, through shouts and thuds carried on airwaves. Federal agents! Hands up now! On the ground! Do not move! A woman's scream tore through the static, raw and piercing. Melissa's voice, unmistakable. No, you don't understand. I didn't mean... Please. Metal clattered. Boots pounded. Another voice barked. Suspect secured. Male suspect resisting. Take him down. Then a dull thump, a groan and silence, broken only by the snap of cuffs closing around wrists. From our car, I saw nothing but the flare of white lights as flashlights converged on the figures. For a moment, the parking lot glowed like a theater washed in unnatural daylight. Shadows jerked, then froze. Then, slowly, the lights dimmed, replaced by the steady blink of red and blue further away. In our car, I sat perfectly still. The teacup lay against my chest. My hands trembled, but I held it upright. My lips moved, but no sound came out. I was crying, though not with tears. It was a grief so deep it bypassed the eyes and lodged itself in the bones. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, the young woman I once hugged in my doorway, welcoming her with daisies and Sunday dinners, the woman who asked me to rock Ella as a newborn while she napped, the woman who kissed Jacob's forehead on his first day of preschool. That woman was gone. All that remained was the one dragged across asphalt in handcuffs, caught in lies so thick they smothered even her own breath. I whispered without sound, only lips forming the words. My daughter-in-law, once held like family, is now a merchant of deceit. Clara touched my shoulder, grounding me. She didn't tell me not to feel. She knew feelings were not weakness. They were proof I was still human in a night that could have turned me to stone. Miller's voice came calm and clear over the radio. Targets secured. No civilian injuries. Operation successful. Hayes exhaled beside me, pen no longer moving. It's over, she said softly. But for me, it wasn't over. Not yet. The arrest closed one door, but grief left another wide open. I had not lost just a daughter-in-law. I had lost the illusion of safety in the family. I had lost trust. And yet, in the quiet that followed, I knew something else had taken root. Resolve. I placed the teacup carefully back into its sleeve of cloth, sliding it into my bag. It had survived another night, crack and all, like me. Outside, the night went on. Sirens faded, officers dispersed. The city swallowed its secrets again, but inside me a truth echoed, low and steady. Some storms tear roofs off houses, some storms tear veils off faces. Tonight had did both. I leaned back against the seat, closed my eyes, and let the weight of silence settle. My tears did not fall. My strength was in holding them, not because I was numb, but because crying would make my hands shake. And tonight, my hands needed to remain steady. Weeks passed between the raid and the trial, and each day felt like a long hallway with no windows. I woke before sunrise, brewed tea in my cracked green cup, and told myself the same sentence over and over. Do not stay silent when the truth knocks. When the court date finally arrived, Charleston was bright and hard-edged, the kind of morning that shows dust in the air and fingerprints on glass. I walked up the courthouse steps with Clara on one side and Father Adrian on the other. In my bag, wrapped in a scarf, the teacup rode with me like a small, steady heart. The federal courtroom was larger than I expected. Wood gleamed with careful polish. The seal above the bench watched us, with its stern gold eye. A dozen strangers filled the gallery, neighbors, reporters, people who always seem to find a seat when the private becomes public. I kept my gaze low until I reached the front row. On the defense side, Melissa sat in a beige suit the jail had provided. The light made her look older, as if the weeks had peeled something away and left only sinew and habit. Beside her, Julian Cortez sat with an expression that was not quite bored and not quite amused. The look of a man who thinks law is a game he knows how to win. The judge entered. We rose. When we sat again, the prosecutor stood. He was a measured man with a voice like a straight line. He did not perform, he laid bricks. Exhibit by exhibit, he built a road the jury could walk. "Government Exhibit A, ma'am," he said, lifting a clear sleeve. "Photographs from a residential safe. Currency banded in amounts consistent with laundering patterns, taken with time-stamped images by the witness, Mrs. Whitmore, and seized by agents in a subsequent lawful search." The photo went to the clerk, then to the jurors, their heads bent as one, paper whispered in their hands. "Exhibit B," he continued, "passports and identification under multiple aliases, including photographs consistent with the defendant, Melissa Whitmore. Documentation suggests preparation for flight." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The weight was in the content. Exhibit C, 3 airline tickets from Chicago to Madrid in business class. Names: Melissa Whitmore, Ella Whitmore, Jacob Whitmore, notably absent, Benjamin Whitmore, husband and father. A murmur rose in the gallery. A reporter's pen scratched faster. Somewhere behind me a woman whispered, "God help those children," and another person sniffed back a tear. "Exhibit D," he said, and here his tone shifted. Not theatrical, but human. The screen on the wall brightened. The photograph filled it. My grandchildren's faces, ringed in red ink. A soft sound went through the room, a throat closing, a breath caught short. I felt the pew tilt beneath me and placed my hand flat to steady myself. The jurors did not look away. Some pressed their lips tight. One woman blinked fast, then set her jaw as if making a private vow. The prosecutor continued, "You will hear forensic testimony that these circles correlate with a code used by criminal networks to mark leverage. You will see messages recovered from a device seized lawfully, messages that describe these children as targets and discuss their delivery." He paused, then turned to the agents. "The government calls Special Agent Miller." Miller took the stand with the same controlled presence he had carried on the night of the raid. He explained chain of custody like a teacher laying out a lesson, each step clear, each handoff documented. He walked the jury through the data extraction, how deleted threads can be recovered, how metadata maps to the real world. Then, the prosecutor asked him to read. Miller glanced at the screen in front of him. "Message from the device registered to the defendant, Melissa Whitmore, to a contact identified as JC. Text reads, 2 targets selected. Ensure delivery." The words landed heavy, as if the room itself absorbed them and grew heavier by degrees. Hayes followed with testimony about surveillance, times, locations, the meeting in the lot, the arrest. When she described the moment, Melissa said, "Where are they?" Without them, the deal falls. A man in the gallery shook his head and closed his eyes. The defense rose. Their attorney was agile and cold. He tried to slide doubt into small spaces. He suggested the money was a loan. He suggested the passports were for protective relocation. He suggested the tickets were a surprise trip. He suggested the messages were taken out of context, a business metaphor, a poor choice of words. Then he turned to me, his smile thin. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "you are 72. You are a widow. You love your grandchildren. You believe your daughter-in-law has harmed your family. Could it be that your fear, combined with your age and grief, colored your interpretation of what you saw?" I did not look at the jurors. I looked at the judge. "Fear can distort," I said, "but photographs do not lie, and law does not run on my feelings. I brought my evidence to people who know how to read it without my sorrow getting in the way." My voice did not shake. I felt the green teacup like a warm coin against my side. The defense pivoted to Melissa. In direct, she cried with care. She told the jury she was manipulated, that Cortez promised safety, that she felt trapped by debts and threats, that the messages were him, not her. She kept saying, "I never meant harm. I was trying to protect my children." Every line landed in a place between truth and rehearsal. When the prosecutor returned for cross, he did not attack her tears. He asked how protection aligned with tickets that excluded her husband. He asked how protection aligned with unregistered phones and passports under other names. He asked quietly why the smallest faces in the photo were circled in red. The room held its breath. The doors at the back opened then. A breath of hallway air moved across the gallery. I turned and saw my son. Ben had come home. He looked thinner than grief. His suit hung wrong on his shoulders. His eyes were red-rimmed with travel. He slid into the row beside me and took my hand without looking away from the front of the room. Minutes later, when the defense tried to imply that my cooperation was revenge rather than responsibility, he could not bear it. He surged to his feet. His palms slammed the rail that separated us from the well. "Enough," he said, his voice breaking. The word cracked like a bell. The bailiff stepped forward. The judge lifted a hand. I rose as well. I placed my palm over my son's knuckles. I felt the heat and tremor of his anger. I leaned close so only he could hear. "No, son, let the law speak." The words came out steady. They tasted like the life I had chosen, not the storm, but the house that stands after. He sank back onto the bench. His chest heaved. His hand turned and gripped mine. He nodded once. I kept my palm over his, like a roof. Closing arguments came as the afternoon thinned. The prosecutor did not raise his voice. He asked the jury to take the path he had built, evidence to intention, intention to action, action to harm. He did not demonize. He named choices. The defense asked for mercy, called Melissa a victim of a man who used fear as currency, called the messages ambiguous, called the tickets a plan she had not yet fully chosen. The jury left. The room exhaled as one body. Waiting is a strange room. You measure time by the squeak of shoes in hallways, by the water level in a paper cup, by the prayers you never learned but somehow remember. Ben stared at the floor. Father Adrian's hand rested on my shoulder. Clara watched the door as if she could. I held my bag in my lap and pressed my thumb into the crack of the teacup through the scarf. A small ridge, a faithful line. When the jury returned, they did not look at anyone. They filed in like people who had crossed a river. The clerk took the paper, the judge asked the questions, the foreperson stood. His voice was quiet, careful. On count 1, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, guilty. On count 2, money laundering, guilty. On count 3, participation in an organized criminal enterprise, guilty. Sound moved through the room like the weather. A gasp, a sob, a chair leg scraped the floor. Melissa bowed her head and let out a thin wail. It sounded like a violin string pulled too tight. Cortez stared at a point on the wall as if it had betrayed him, as if drywall should be loyal to men like him. The judge thanked the jury and set a date for sentencing. Custody motions would follow. Protective orders would be renewed. Law moved forward like a machine that had been built for this exact road. Ben's hand tightened around mine. The muscles in his jaw worked. Then he exhaled as if his lungs had been holding 10 years at once. He whispered, "Mom," and nothing else. Gratitude and ruin in one syllable. I pressed my forehead briefly to his shoulder. We stood when the judge left. People began to file out, their faces a mix of pity and hunger and relief. Reporters waited in the hall. Clara shook her head once, and they stepped back. Agents Miller and Hayes approached us with a kind of quiet I have come to recognize, the quiet of people who do hard jobs so that families can walk out into the sun. "You held," Hayes said to me. "That matters." "It was never about winning," I answered. "It was about making sure the right voice spoke." Outside, the light had softened. The flag on the courthouse stirred in a mild wind. I reached into my bag and touched the teacup again. Its crack was where it had always been, the flaw that proved it had lived. I thought of the line I had carried from the first day to this one. Do not stay silent when the truth knocks. Today, the law had answered the door. Ben lifted his eyes to mine. "What now?" he asked. "Now we go home," I said. "We keep the children close. We let the law finish its work, and we build something that cannot be bought or threatened." He nodded. We walked down the steps together, each step a little steadier than the last. I did not cry, not because I had no tears, but because I had learned when to keep my hands steady. There would be time for tears later. There would be time for tea. There would be time for small laughter in a kitchen that smells of cinnamon again. For now, I held my son's hand and kept moving forward. The days after the verdict were strange ones, filled with both heaviness and the tiniest flickers of relief. Courtrooms are made for conclusions, but family wounds are not so easily stitched. For every headline that declared justice served, there were quiet nights where Ella called for her mother in her sleep, and Jacob clutched his toy car with a frown that looked too old for a 4-year-old boy. Ben came to me one evening, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of 2 decades sat there. We sat at my small kitchen table in Charleston, the cracked teacup between us steaming faintly with chamomile. He rubbed his palms against his knees, then looked at me. "Mom, I'm filing for divorce. I have to ask for full custody. I can't—" His voice broke. "I can't risk them ever being pulled back into that world." I had known it was coming. Still, hearing the words felt like the sound of a door closing forever. A marriage that had begun with daisies and promises was ending with stamped court orders and custody petitions. I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. "It's not a weakness to protect," I said. "You're doing what a father must do." The weeks that followed were filled with paperwork, lawyers, and hearings. Clara guided us with a mix of sharpness and quiet kindness, making sure Ben had everything in order. Through it all, I became the steady anchor. Breakfast prepared, school clothes laid out, bedtime stories whispered. The children needed a rhythm more than anything. One Saturday, after the dust of filings and signatures had settled, we went to the park. The sun was soft gold, filtering through oak leaves that swayed gently in the breeze. Ella had a secondhand bicycle, pink paint chipped at the corners, training wheels rattling as she pedaled in determined circles. Jacob chased a soccer ball across the grass, his laughter quick and high, sometimes tumbling onto the ground only to spring up again. I sat on the weathered bench at the edge of the playground, my green teacup warm between my palms. Ben stood a few yards away, watching the children with an expression that was part smile and part ache. His eyes followed Ella's wobbling turns, Jacob's stubby kicks. For a moment, he looked like the boy I once knew, chasing kites in the same kind of park. But then the weight returned, the awareness that their mother's absence was not a trip or a misunderstanding. It was a prison sentence. Ella pedaled over, her cheeks flushed, her hair curling with sweat. "Grandma, did you see? I made it all the way without stopping." Her joy was a ribbon cutting through the heaviness. I clapped softly, letting my smile rise to meet hers. "Yes, love, I saw every inch." She laughed, then turned back to the path, pedaling with renewed confidence. Jacob ran over next, ball tucked under his arm. "Daddy, kick with me!" Ben stooped, and for the first time in months, I saw him laugh, small, brief, but real. He kicked gently, Jacob shrieked with delight, and the two of them passed the ball back and forth under the wide stretch of sky. I stayed on the bench, holding my cup, letting the warmth seep into me. The world around us was ordinary. Dogs chasing sticks, mothers chatting by the swings, the scent of grilled peanuts drifting from a cart. But for us, it was extraordinary. We were surviving. We were stitching ourselves back together, not with perfection, but with persistence. As I watched, a thought formed, clear and quiet. Do not stay silent when the truth knocks, but also, do not scream into the storm. Stand up. The words echoed in me, not as advice to others, but as a reminder carved into my own heart. Ben came to sit beside me after a while, Jacob tugging at his pant leg, Ella circling on her bike. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes on the children. "They'll always ask about her," he said softly. "What do I tell them?" I took a slow sip of tea, the crack in the cup pressing lightly against my lip. Tell them the truth, but gently, that their mother made choices she shouldn't have, that she lost her way, and that love can exist without approval. He nodded, silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, "Do you think they'll hate her?" I shook my head. Children don't hate the way we do. They grieve, they wonder, they carry questions like pebbles in their pockets. Our job is to help them carry without letting the stones grow too heavy. Ella wobbled by again, calling, "Grandma, look, no hands!" I gasped, half in fear, half in awe. But she steadied herself, laughing, triumphant. Jacob kicked his ball so hard it rolled into a patch of sunlight, and he clapped for himself. I leaned back on the bench, the sun warming my shoulders, the tea cooling slowly in my hands. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself a deep breath without dread hiding underneath it. There were still scars. There would always be scars, but scars meant healing had begun. When the children finally grew tired, we walked home together. Ella pushing her bike, Jacob holding both our hands. Ben carried the soccer ball under his arm, and for a brief stretch of sidewalk, he looked less like a man carrying loss and more like a father carrying promise. That night, after the children had fallen asleep in their beds, I sat by the window with my journal. I wrote one line steady and firm: do not stay silent when the truth knocks, but also do not gawk, do not shout, stand up. I closed the book, placed my teacup beside it, and let the quiet of the night settle around me. Healing was not loud. It was not a trumpet or a firework. It was a park bench in sunlight, a child's laugh in the wind, a father's weary smile finding its way back. And in that silence, I felt whole enough to hope again. Several months later, our lives had found a new rhythm in Charleston. The city itself felt different now, still noisy in its own way, still carrying the weight of old bricks and church bells, but it no longer pressed against my chest the way it once did. Instead, it felt like a quilt, patchwork, a little frayed at the edges, but warm enough to cover what remained of us. Our apartment was small, perched above a bakery that woke the mornings with the smell of cinnamon rolls and coffee. The walls carried the marks of children, crayon doodles on paper taped to the refrigerator, smudges of little hands on door frames, shoes scattered by the entryway like breadcrumbs. The space was humble, yet alive. I had grown used to its rhythm, the squeak of the old floorboards, the kettle that whistled with more enthusiasm than accuracy, the laughter that sometimes filled the kitchen so suddenly it startled me into tears. Ella and Jacob were adjusting in the way children do, with resilience wrapped in questions. Ella had begun drawing constantly, pages filled with bright houses, gardens, and skies. One afternoon, she came to me with a drawing she was particularly proud of. It was a house with a wide red roof, stick figures standing beneath it, all holding hands. She pointed as she named them. "That's you, Grandma. That's Daddy. That's me and Jacob." Then she tilted her head. "But I didn't draw Mommy." Her voice was light, almost casual, but her eyes searched mine with an unspoken weight. I smiled softly, though inside my heart tightened. I knelt, pulled her close, and kissed her forehead. "It's a beautiful house," I said, "and sometimes love lives even in the people who aren't there. We just have to hold it gently." She nodded, accepting the answer in her own way before skipping off to tape the picture to the wall above her bed. That night, I opened my journal and wrote slowly, my hand steady but heavy. Today, Ella drew a house with a red roof. In it, she drew me, Ben, and Jacob. She left her mother out. I feel sorrow for the absence, but I know I must fill that space with love so it does not become emptiness. Ben had changed as well. The court had granted him full custody, and the legal stamp brought both relief and sadness. He threw himself into fatherhood with a focus that sometimes bordered on exhaustion, but I could see the small cracks of healing beginning to show. On Sundays, he would take Jacob to kick a ball at the park, while Ella and I walked the market stalls, choosing fresh fruit or secondhand books. In the evenings, he would sit at the table, helping Ella sound out her words, while Jacob built towers with his blocks. There was still silence between us sometimes, the silence of things we could not yet say aloud, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was space to rebuild. For me, healing came in smaller, quieter ways. Every morning, I brewed tea in my cracked green cup. It had survived all of it, the fear, the running, the trial, and now it was just tea again. I would sit by the window as the bells of St. Francis tolled across the square. The sound carried memory, yes, but also a reminder of endurance. I thought often of Melissa. Some nights I would wake from dreams where she was once again standing in my kitchen, apron tied badly, asking me how to knead bread. Other nights I dreamt of her face in court, pale and sharp, speaking words I wished I had never heard. I did not know if forgiveness would ever come, but I knew vengeance had no place in me. My role was not to curse her. It was to hold my grandchildren steady so that they did not inherit her shadows. One evening, I sat with Jacob on my lap while he drew scribbles across a page. His little hand pressed clumsily against mine. "Grandma," he asked, "are we safe now?" I looked into his wide eyes and felt the weight of his question. Safety is never something anyone can promise forever. But I kissed his cheek and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart, we are safe, and I will always keep you safe." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his crayons. As for me, the lessons of those months had settled deep. Do not stay silent when the truth knocks, but also do not scream into the storm. Stand up. I carried that echo like a compass. Silence had nearly cost us everything. But rage could have done the same. It was not noise that saved us. It was steadiness, persistence, and the courage to move our feet when dawn was still far away. Sometimes neighbors in the building would greet me in the stairwell. They knew fragments of my story. Newspapers had written just enough for whispers to bloom. Some would look at me with pity, others with quiet respect. Once, a young mother carrying a baby paused and said, "I don't know how you kept going." I smiled faintly, hand resting on the rail. "Because there were children who needed me to," I answered, and in her eyes I saw the flicker of recognition, as if she understood that truth in her own life. Now, as I sit by the window with the evening fading, I think of the question I want to leave with you, because stories do not end when the judge strikes the gavel or when the children laugh again. Stories live on in those who hear them. If you have ever been forced to choose between truth and the comfort of false safety, you will understand me. And if you were in my place, if truth knocked on your door in the shape of a whispered warning, in the weight of a small plastic bag, would you stay silent or would you walk before dawn? I want to know. Tell me in the comments below. Your story may be the candle that helps another find their way in the dark. The bells of St. Francis begin to ring now, their sound spilling through the evening air. I pour another cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a gentle prayer. Behind me, the drawings of houses with red roofs cover the wall, each one brighter than the last. In them, I see not only what we lost, but what we are building. And in the glow of that small apartment, I choose to believe that love, steady and quiet, can be enough.